Before we dive into this, I think there's two really different ways this conversation would go, and we can do both. I think we should decide first, do we want to talk about sex work through the lens of the teleology of what we think sex ought to be for, or do we want to talk about like the impacts on society first?
I think both should be.
Yeah, but I think because
the
they're both very, very different arguments. So do we want to focus on the first one of like what sex ought to be, or?
I think we can talk about that because I think the big thing that's dividing us is that it is bad to misuse sex. Sex is a very important thing.
Okay.
And so if one misuses it, this will tend to lead to all kinds of social problems.
There's natural consequences to the misuse or the abuse of sex. And you can live in an unreality and sort of mitigate those natural consequences, but it only goes so far, and there are going to be casualties. And
so like a question I have is, you guys are saying like porn like has been so bad for society. What are some of these outcomes you've seen since like the late 90s, early 2000s, when the internet, became a thing? And you guys are saying porn is now making society worse, when in a lot of ways it seems like since the late 1990s and early 2000s, we have less cases of SA, less child abuse, abortion rates are down like 41%. I'm not saying this is because of porn, but it doesn't seem like porn has turned everyone into these violent, people are having less sex, we have less teen pregnancies, all of that stuff. So what?
I dispute the claim that the sexual assault, can we say that, or we just say SA?
That's fine.
Yeah, okay.
That's fine.
I dispute the claim that porn leads directly to a reduction in sexual assault. And we have to be careful to not do after, therefore, because of. That porn becomes more prevalent. What happens after that? If you look at statistics of sexual assault, they have been declining since the 1990s, but since 2012, they have dramatically increased. Anyone who's watching this, just Google rape United States 1990 to 2022, or rape UK, UK from 2002 to 2022, and you see a dramatic rise. Like in the UK, it's like goes from 60,000 reported cases to 130,000 reported cases from 2012 to 2017. What's driving that?
Wait, can I ask real quick, actually, because I just looked these up and I noticed that what you said is exactly right. From 1992, they fall until 2012, and then they spike. What happened in 2013? Wasn't 2013 the start of the Me Too movement?
Me Too movement started in 2017 with Alyssa Milano.
Was it 2017?
Well, yeah, okay, Alyssa Milano broke it.
Okay, gotcha.
I thought about that too, that might be. Now, I think that when we talk about what causes things to happen in society, it's rarely ever one thing.
Yeah.
Because people are complex. So, like, why? Also, there's a difficulty in assessing how many rapes occur. Like, it's not as hard to figure out how many murders occur, because you just count the dead bodies, or how many cars are stolen. You count the cars that are taken. But many rapes are not prosecuted, or they're not reported, But I think the number of allegations, I do want to hear, Lila, your thoughts on that. We see it going up, but I think that one element that would make sense to see that drive from the 2010s is that online pornography had a huge boost during this time period. That we have Pornhub was started in 2007, and it explodes going through 2012, 2015 on. And if you're wondering, like, the things that I'm concerned about, you look at like Pornhub from 2012 to like 2020, what are the most popular terms being searched? Most popular terms are teen, mom, stepmom. This is not just like your vanilla pornography people are looking for, though I find it suspicious that Pornhub isn't reporting the teen search anymore. So I think that could be a part in there of that further degradation of sexuality during that time period.
I think that's a very significant point that you just raised about Pornhub and the most popular search terms. The reality is child sexual assault material has proliferated in recent years with the rise of more internet spread of pornography and the ease of use of the spread of pornography. Pornography that is violent is increasing. Pornography that involves minors is increasing. So there's that world of that, people involved in that, usually those that have, you can use the word addiction or compulsion around pornography. There's a need for it to be increasingly intense or violent or disordered in the sexual acts that are being portrayed for them to find it fulfilling. And so they have to continue on this like porn use journey that they're on, and it leads to many other victims left in the wake of it, like children. But another side of it too is the relational side for people that are trying to make families, because I think civilization is built on families. Families is where what we're born into. It's where we find our greatest meaning and worth, how we're formed as kids, how we become good citizens one day, and how we discover love for the first time. And today, around 20% of couples report that they experience conflict because of porn use of one of the partners. Like, this is a significant thing afflicting a lot of relationships. And one of the top rated things in divorce settlements are the porn use of one of the partners. So it's really damaging. And I think the life experience of many people, I'm sure, listening into this podcast right now, they know people, everyone knows someone who's been hurt by pornography. So it's really pernicious.
I don't think the pleasure of orgasm balances out the cons.
So the data, I'm sure you guys, when you were looking at porn, it's very mixed. The big medical consensus is that like this addiction and all that's not a thing. When it comes to couples, it seems like when the couples are on the same page, that it doesn't lead to negative impacts. It leads to that when there's one couple.
What do you mean by on the same page?
Like when both, like if like in a couple, if they don't care if the other person watches porn, which is a lot of couples, then it doesn't seem to have these kind of negative.
Do you think
impacts.
that's the majority?
I think it's a lot of people.
Do you think the majority of couples, the wife or the girlfriend doesn't mind?
That's really hard to tell. The majority of people I know, it's like that. Maybe the majority of people he knows, and the majority of people it's the opposite. So I don't know. I do think in general, people don't see viewing pornography as like cheating.
Do you think
terrible.
the majority of people think that cheating is wrong, though, or even asking, can I have an open
cheating is wrong
relationship?
because it violates your boundaries. But if that's not violating your boundaries, which it's not for a lot of people, then it doesn't seem to be having these negative
Do you think a majority of wives would think that it's wrong for a husband to even ask if he should be allowed to cheat?
That's not cheating is about violating boundaries. But if he asks, is it okay if I watch porn when we're not together? A lot of wives, girlfriends would say yes.
But do you think a lot of the wives and girlfriends saying yes are saying yes because they're really chill about it? It's not a big deal. We don't care.
Yeah.
Or they're saying yes because society is telling them you should say yes.
What I was saying about the boundaries is it okay for a husband to ask, hey, can we renegotiate these boundaries?
Yeah, of course. It's always
so
okay.
There's nothing wrong with a husband saying, hey, because I think many people that would wives, girlfriends, lots who would say, no, that's wrong that you would even ask. That's just not okay to do. You don't ask for something like that.
Some people, and I think for some people that's not the case. I don't know exactly percentages, but the majority, like exactly, if I'm talking about like people I know, this is all I have, anecdotal evidence, unless there's some study done on this, is a lot of people like don't care.
So I think there's a bit of a myth of this idea that, well, if my boundary is that it's okay to share you sexually with someone else, even though we're in a supposedly committed relationship. I think there's a mythology that as long as there's consent between the two adults, then it's okay for one or both to cheat as long as they know and they're okay.
But you're
they're
using the
okay
word
with it.
cheat when we're not talking about cheating.
I'm saying not have sexual fidelity, so have sexual experiences, relationships with other people, whether that's through a screen or in life, in real life. And there are studies that show, I have one right here that shows that married people who more frequently view porn, even if it's together, even if it's like we're consenting, this is a thing we're doing together, are more likely to experience marital dissatisfaction down the line than couples that do not look at porn together. So pornography has a pernicious effect even on consenting couples who are saying we're doing this together. It's so great.
And that was a longitudinal study based on the social science survey with 2,000 people. It's not just like a correlative effect.
Yeah. So even if in our minds we rationalize and we live in the unreality of this is not affecting me, I can have this open marriage or I can have this open relationship and my partner can look at porn or have another sexual relationship, it still affects you in the real world, and it still affects your long-term potential for happiness and fidelity, or not just fidelity, but happiness and fulfillment in the relationship. And so we can tell ourselves a theory or a myth of like, hey, it's going to be okay, I'm cool with this. But in reality, it doesn't work that way in the long run.
But see, like with a lot of this, I'm not sure if you guys are really frustrated looking up this stuff too, because so many studies conflict when it comes to porn and viewing. And it's like women who view pornography report higher sexual satisfaction when they view it with a partner. In fact, the data on women,
why would that be, Jasmine? Why would that be?
What do you mean, why would that be?
Well, you just said women report higher satisfaction if the porn is being viewed with a partner, because at least they feel like I'm not being 100% cheated on in this moment.
No, I don't think that's it. I think you're just putting your framework on everybody else. Like, I'm a woman too. I don't care if my partner watches porn. It's not just me trying to satisfy him. It's not just me being like, and I think a lot of people, you have to separate being with another partner physically versus porn, because I think the numbers there would be vastly different on who's okay if their partner, when they're not around, is watching porn versus who's okay with them sleeping with another person in real life. I think you're going to get widely different opinions there from girlfriends, wives, women on whether that's okay or not.
I would say when we look at the studies, like for example, in 2023, Engelkamp et al. Published a study in the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, and it did a quantitative analysis on the most common themes among couples where the man views pornography is that the woman is glad that he told him, that he talked about it openly, but disapproves, or is allowing the husband to look at pornography but does not want to hear about it. So I think you would say that only a minority of women are positively in favor of this. It's either negative or ambivalent.
Well, and I think the point is the longitudinal study you mentioned and I mentioned is that even those that say they're in favor of it and are like watching it as a couple have worse outcomes down the line. And I think that's part of the, the point here is that even if you're in a very unique situation, you're making your living doing this thing, right? And so in your mind, of course it's going to be great. I know you're going to defend it and say it's going to be great. But the reality is even people that are defending it or saying it's fine in my marriage down the line don't have the best outcome.
Yeah, well, you
also,
guys
to be fair too, real quick, because you talked about personal career, you guys are both ideologically, you could never change your position on this.
That's completely
regardless.
not true. Of course
Aren't you both
so
religious?
All the studies show that it's good for you. Would you say
I chose
it's okay?
to be Catholic, and I can choose to reject my faith.
Sure,
too.
but if like the research,
No one's
but she
forcing
could
me
also
to be Catholic.
Yeah, but
That
she could
was
also
gonna be
change
what I
her
said.
career
Yeah, I
too,
could say
right?
my point
Yeah.
is that even
I'm just
if
saying that, like,
all
we
the
can
data showed
Hey
that
guys,
it was,
just one at a time.
We can change our mind on empirical questions about whether a majority of people feel satisfaction in something. You can't use a social science survey to determine whether something is moral or immoral.
We're
Yeah,
just-
sure.
we're
I was
talking
only
about
pushing back on
outcomes.
the claim that like because it's her job, she has to defend
Well,
it.
I
Because
was
I
more
could just
speaking
easily say,
to outcomes, though, because what I'm trying to explain here is not. My point here is that you can say, and one can say, I'm comfortable with this, I'm fine with this, it's okay in my marriage or my relationship. But my point is the social data shows that people who are comfortable with open relationships or pornography in their relationship have worse outcomes down the line.
well, the people who have the worst outcomes when it comes to viewing pornography are people who have moral incongruence with it. That's what there's been a huge meta-analysis where they looked at the number one determinant or the number one predictor of having bad experiences with porn or quote unquote porn addiction, which the medical consensus is it's not a thing, is moral incongruence, and being religious is one of the biggest predictors of that. So I agree, porn is really bad for Catholics. I just don't agree that it's bad for everybody.
But my point here is that even people who find a way to morally rationalize the use of pornography or whatever it is, down the line at large outcomes are worse for open marriages.
But that kind of argument is like saying, well, gambling addiction isn't really real because the people who are most upset about gambling are only the people who are upset about losing money. But people who don't care about losing money, well, they're not really that psychologically disturbed about gambling a lot. But maybe they should be worried about that, just like people should be worried about what porn is doing to them when it desensitizes their brain and it makes them think that I need more and more hits and more disturbing pornography to get off.
But the difference is that with, and that's why the DSM-5 accepts gambling. They've said multiple times, they've rejected porn multiple times because you can't make a link to how much people
they
view.
include hypersexuality under impulse control
Not
disorder.
in the DSM-5. That's in the World Health Organization. It's a compulsion, but not an addiction.
But is a compulsion a good thing, Jasmine?
well, is hypersexuality just a compulsion to masturbate, or is it a compulsion to have sexual experiences?
It's
I
like
mean, either
umbrella.
way is a compulsion that you are at the mercy of, and that often brings a lot
it's
of
a
harm
very
and
small
suffering.
percentage.
No, but I don't
Is
see.
that a
I
good
don't see
goal?
the difference there. That if you can be in a situation where I think gambling and porn, they're very similar in their compulsivity. That there are lots of people who can gamble. I gamble, and I didn't lose the house. Lots of people can gamble, but there's a subset when they gamble. It turns their brain on too much and they need to get more and more highs from it. So they gamble more and more and more. And just even seeing the slot machine, it does something to their brain. And they're in a situation where I don't want to be gambling. I feel bad. I don't want to be doing this, but they just can't stop. Similar thing with porn. There's lots of people who watch porn and they don't turn into maniacs or anything like that. But there's a subset where it lights up their brains and they know, I don't want to be doing this. I know it's just killing my marriage. My wife feels awful knowing that I go and look at this stuff. I feel bad, but I can't stop. Don't those seem
But
like similar levels of compulsion?
It may seem that way, but the scientific consensus, right, the DSM-5 statement is that other excessive behavioral patterns such as internet gaming have also been described, but the research on these and other behavioral syndromes is less clear. They make it akin to exercise addiction, shopping addiction, and sex addiction. The data is just not there.
The point is
that it affects you the way gambling does. That's not me saying it. That's what the scientific
but the
consensus is.
DSM-5 is not an infallible Bible for everyone. You have other studies. For example, Love et al. Published a study on the neuroscientific foundation of pornography addiction, and that was a 2015 article, and a meta-analysis, and they do link it to other addictions and other compulsions.
And
so I think if people just look at it, you just take a bird's eye view, the person who feels bad gambling and can't stop, the person who feels bad shopping and can't stop, and the person who looks at porn or sees prostitutes and feels bad and can't stop. It all seems pretty similar to me.
But the difference is that with porn, they've done multiple studies where it's like somebody who has positive attitudes toward it versus someone who has negative attitudes toward it. They're watching the same amount and they're having the same.
Those are short-term studies, though.
But it's
So
what all the
but the
data
point
shows.
is, you can tell yourself, again, you can live in unreality and tell yourself, this sexual act of infidelity, I know you don't call it infidelity because someone consented to it, but me going and, being polyamorous, or me going and having multiple sexual experiences outside of my marriage or my relationship, or me going and looking at pornography or using pornography, you can tell yourself and experience short-term pleasure. You absolutely
No, I think
can.
a lot of wives would
So
say
we're
that if their husband is chatting with you on a live cam, they would say that's cheating. Do you think a lot of wives would feel that way?
You don't know
agree.
how many wives find me for their husbands.
Also, wait, hold on. Yeah, when we talk about like cheating or murder, when we talk about like murder is clearly unjustified killing, right?
Where do we talk about murder?
I'm just saying that the word murder means that's just unjustified killing. It's baked into there's no such thing as a justified murder. When you use the word cheating, then you're begging the question. Of course, it's wrong. Yeah. But the question is whether or not these behaviors can be engaged in like consensual ways. Right? So to say that like,
but that takes us back to what is sex for. That might maybe
that's fine. Yeah, we can go back to that. Wait, hold on, wait. I'm just
go right ahead.
Okay, yeah, I'm just saying that you can't just keep calling it cheating over and over and over again because you're begging the question. You're loading in with the word cheating is baked into this idea that a boundary is being violated or that a non-consensual activity is happening, and that might be your position and that might be your opinion, but you can't have that perspective on two other people's boundaries. If they say, well, in our relationship we're allowed to watch porn, it's inappropriate for you to call that cheating.
A different point in response to Jasmine's
no, hold
position.
on. I'm just being clear because Jasmine contradicted that point, and then you tried to explain why. Well, actually, it is always infidelity. When infidelity again has baked into it that you're tautologically trying to define away the argument, which is whether or not you can engage in these behaviors in a healthy way. And you're saying, well, obviously you can't because it's infidelity. It's like, well, you're begging the question. So if we're going to talk about the behaviors themselves, we can, but you can't call them all cheating or infidelity.
You can define the terms as you please. I think my point here with Jasmine.
Well, hold on. Wait, what I'm not defining it as I please. We all agree that that's what those words mean. Every single person watching. Infidelity and cheating means that you are doing something in contradiction to what your partner wants. We all agree with that, and we all agree that those are bad.
Well, it's specific to sexual behavior.
Sure,
outside of your
but everybody here
relationship with your
agrees that
partner.
infidelity and cheating is bad, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we all agree with that. So then why say like, well, this is cheating? We already agree that that's bad.
I mean,
it's whether or not it is cheating,
we can agree to disagree on the point that yes, I think it is infidelity or cheating.
So you think that
to
if
have
like
sex outside of
two
your
people are in a
marriage,
relationship
I
and
think
they
that
say
is
that hey, it's
infidelity or
okay if
cheating.
we watch porn, you think they're still cheating on each other?
I
in
think
your
that is
world?
being unfaithful to each other. Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
So she has a different view on.
Yeah, I
She
understand,
has a
but
different definition, I guess.
And we can agree to disagree on that at this point. But my larger point that I was trying to make with you, Jasmine, or kind of get to the bottom of was, yes, you can say I'm feeling great about this. I just had an orgasm. It feels great. I'm so happy with this, pornography I just consumed, or this, webcam person I just spoke with, or whatever, or had this, relationship with, or whatever it is. But in the long term, these things don't serve the person or society. So we can actually agree with you that hedonism feels good in the moment. Like, I don't think Trent would even disagree, at least for the person taking part in the hedonism. They might feel sick deep in their conscience, but I think in the moment, physically, they're going to feel good. And that's the temptation of hedonism, right? It's like, it feels good. Of course, I'm going to do it.
But that's not true. I mean, women who view pornography report higher sexual satisfaction, improved communication about sex with their partner, greater comfort with their own sexual, greater comfort with their own sexual orientation, more frequent and higher quality sex, easier time reaching orgasm.
Study following
There's
their
multiple
life
studies. Almost
and their
all the
porn
data
use.
on women in pornography in the old days, it used to give them negative body image issues, but since like people like me, you're welcome, or like more amateur porn started coming out, actually women report feeling better about their bodies. There's a huge study about women feeling much better about their vulvas now because they're seeing different types of vulvas represented in porn.
So you think pornographic accounts online, like there's a lot of Instagram accounts, for example, that are kind of some soft core pornography are making women at large and young girls at large feel good about their bodies.
Pornography, there's
I don't think
studies
that's
about
correct at all.
pornography and women who view pornography, because a lot of women watch like amateur porn more so than the mainstream studio porn now, and you're seeing all different kinds of body types. So that study that was done on women who now feel like, oh, I actually feel better about my vulva, I feel better about my body, when we compare that to women who viewed porn in the past, but when studio porn was the only kind of porn out, we're seeing a big difference.
Yeah, I mean,
And
at large, sexual objectification of women online and
who is the
objectifying
majority?
certain,
Who views porn
especially
more,
certain
men or
body
women?
parts, has been detrimental to young girls' mental
men
health.
view porn more, but women also do view it.
Sure,
like,
I
pretty
don't
frequently.
disagree with that, but I think we just still need to go back to just the idea of my argument. I think would be our argument that why pornography and prostitution is bad for society is that it encourages this false view about what sex is for that leads to all of these kinds of bad consequences.
Well, what are the bad
Wait.
consequences?
Also, wait, real
Well,
quick. Can I run through something? So I'm taking notes on something. Okay. So real quick on just like from top to bottom. So
Well, why don't we go back and forth?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can. Yeah, I just want a chance to go back and forth on something. So I heard a lot of points from Red, but I haven't been able to jump in on a lot of these. On the first one, so in 2013, the FBI redefined rape to include all forms of penetration on somebody, including like digital penetration. So that largely explains like the huge gap in numbers there. I don't know if you were trying to imply that in 2013 there was a spike that happened due to pornography or due to some other reason.
I'm saying I'm saying that's certainly plausible. It's a part of it, and you don't have enough evidence to say that explains all of the increase.
No, but there was a massive redefinition.
It also wouldn't explain the increase at the same time in England.
And you have
I don't
no
know about the
evidence
increase
that
in England.
porn-
Well, I don't know about the increase in England, but I feel like if the numbers dramatically jumped in 2013, it's strange that you didn't search for the answer for why they jumped and just assumed because it fits the
There's-
narrative of it must be pornography or whatever.
There's
When a
also-
redefining of rape would be a really big reason why the numbers might change. For
But
instance, if
there's-
you're familiar with Sweden's sexual assault statistics relating to immigration and everything, like the Swedish redefinition of a lot of these crimes is a reason why some of these numbers jump. So I think anytime you see a huge jump in the data, I think if you're inquisitive, you'll usually ask like, oh, well, I wonder why the data changed.
But
Yeah.
Destiny,
One of the
there's
reasons-
also been meta-analysis of porn consumption that shows that many studies that show the link between porn use, and keep in mind a lot of porn today, some studies say 88% of porn today involves violence or aggressive acts.
I don't
and
believe
there's
that.
A, there's
Women
a link
are more
between,
likely
Wait, when you
there's
say
a link
violence or
between,
aggressive acts, what does that mean?
it involves, I mean, at the extreme simulation of
No,
sexual
you said
assault.
88%. I watch a lot of porn. I don't know
No.
how much porn is violent or aggressive. I'm just curious what counts as an aggressive act. 88% of porn is aggressive acts?
Forceful, causing pain or discomfort to the person that's being involved in the sexual act.
Yeah, so that's one that was a 2010 study. Another one
but-
that was published by Vera Gray 2021 in the British Journal of Criminology said that it put it at 1 in 8 had acts of violence that would be considered violence, like under things
Sure.
like
The law.
for example, binding forelimbs and penetration, gagging.
Sure.
So
I could buy the 1 in 8.
But
The
to
1
just
in
finish
8.
my first point,
Women
just
are
to
the
finish-
ones that are disproportionately actually seeking that stuff out. So is that also
Well,
just to please people?
They're also disproportionately
But- or
addicted
some
to
are
stuff.
just
I
into
would
that.
say,
Wait,
I mean,
hold
that's-
on just a sec.
yeah,
Destiny, you wanted to go, and then Lila, I'll
Yeah.
have you
I just wanted
respond.
to
Go ahead,
dive into
Destiny.
it. So I could believe the 1 in 8 number, the 88%. There's no chance that that's true.
That's not of all pornography. It's of the 300 most common.
Sure. I'm just saying 88% of all pornography being violent, unless you're defining like oral sex as violent, there's no shot that the number is that high. That's just
It's of the most popular.
You know
And
what?
that's why on Pornhub you're having teens, and then you're having step parents involved or stepmom involved.
I think
increasingly
I think
deranged forms of it.
urinating and ejaculating on somebody's face. I think that's violent and degrading.
I understand what you're saying, but to the vast majority of normal human beings, urinating on somebody's face is far different than ejaculating on somebody's face. Maybe in the Catholic world, those are similar things, but in the ordinary world, those are two completely and totally separate acts.
I think most people in the regular world would consider that utterly degrading.
I'm saying those two things are different. If you want to classify both of them as degrading, that's fine.
Why are they different?
Because I don't know how much into detail, but urinating on somebody's face, the kink of water sports, is considered to be generally more extreme. There's far fewer people that are into it, and you're involving non-sexual fluids now in like a sexual sense. That's just considered a more hardcore type of.
Why? If anything, urine is probably a more sterile liquid, and just because fewer people do it doesn't mean it's more extreme. I'm sure there's fewer people who do like Star Trek cosplay porn, but that doesn't mean it's more extreme than others just because it's a minority. I think that's just
It's probably considered more
intuition
extreme.
here.
It's not an intuition. It's because generally the further you get away from things that are less directly involved with sex, and then like the more uncomfortable those things tend to make people, the more we would classify those things as being kind of like extreme. I think is like I mean, I don't know if, I'm sure we could have a huge debate on like, is bukkake porn considered extreme, or is it just like a hardcore kink? Or we can get into it. I'm just saying in general, if you look at the number of people into a kink like water sports, or you mentioned like scatology, like stuff like that, versus
water
people that are
sports.
into, like,
You're talking about, is that just urinating on others, or is it other?
urinating on people?
Yeah.
Or I think anything involving people. I'm not sure. I don't.
Okay.
Maybe Brian can fill us in more on.
Because that's just euphemism. I enjoy water sports. I don't enjoy that.
Well, that's what it's called.
Well,
right?
I don't care. I mean, people can come up with all this sort of stuff to smooth over. What is
hold on.
actually
No one's
going
trying to.
on.
I'm just trying to give an accurate accounting
That's
of how you refer to these things. If you're looking them up or trying to find
Go
out.
ahead. Did you want to ask anything else?
Yeah,
I have a question
I
as
reject
well.
this idea of like, well, as pornography increases, child sex material increases. Therefore,
That's a fact, though.
that's
Destiny.
fine that it's a fact. But what I notice is oftentimes with porn, to try to refute like the central point, people will point to a negative outcome that might be increasing and pretend that counts as a refutation of the single point. A statement that I can
That's
make.
not what we did, though, Destiny.
That's exactly what you're doing.
No.
You're saying that as
It's
pornography increases, child sexual material might increase, which means it's an attack against pornography. But I would say is
it's a form of pornography.
Let me finish my statement. What I would say, it is a form of pornography. Literally, the increase of anything involving, say, children playing video games necessarily increases the exposure of them to people looking to abuse children. That doesn't necessarily mean that online video games or children playing online video games are bad. It just means you have to control for the negative outcome of people abusing people playing online video games. Same thing with pornography. It's not an argument against pornography if some people might abuse it in a way. There might be some people that actually record actual sexual assault. That's not an argument against pornography. It's an argument against people doing that bad thing.
It is an argument of the most commonly searched for terms are things like teen, barely legal, and they're constantly searched over and over as the most popular thing, which people aren't doing with like video games.
what
I mean,
is, like,
here's
the
the here's
harm-
the
If
here's
something-
the,
well, if
but
something-
here's the theory that I think that the social data proves very clearly, and this is the point that when we disorder sex, when we divorce sex from love, fidelity, commitment, family, like the whole project of marriage, I'm gonna, sex can bring life into the world. If we do bring a life into the world, we're gonna stick together, love each other, build a family together. When you take sex out of that context, out of the context of love and marriage, and you put it in the context of my goal, my orgasm, what I want, right? At whatever cost I can pay, provided someone else consents, right? It's not just, I think, that person that will suffer and the other people engaged directly in that will suffer, but it is children. And so you said, well, yes, okay, there's a proliferation of child sexual assault material, yeah, but that's not saying porn is responsible for that. That is a form of the porn that's being created and consumed at large in our society. So to say that children are somehow unscathed by the proliferation of porn, I think is totally untrue, Destiny.
That's fine,
And in
but to
addition,
say that okay.
And in addition, I'll just say one other thing. The flip side of this, we've debated on this before, Trent has as well. Sexual hedonism at large, in addition, leads to what we have today, which is abortion on demand. You mentioned abortion rates are so low. They're actually very high. There are nearly 1 million a year
they're lower
in this
since
country.
When porn, with the wide availability of porn, it's gone down a lot. So I'm
But
just
the
curious,
internet
you guys
has-
are saying,
but
oh my gosh,
not
there's all
in-
this violent stuff now.
But Jasmine,
I'm looking
you
at
know,
the data.
Jasmine.
There's nothing linking porn
Jasmine,
to increased
there's more-
violence. There's actually a lot of studies that link the wide availability of pornography to less
Jasmine,
violence. I have
there's
3
more
studies
pornography
right here.
today.
We found that in the
But
Czech Republic, in
Jasmine,
Denmark,
3 or
in
4
Japan,
decades ago,
in
it was
China,
fine
and
to
in Hong
Playboy
Kong.
magazine or go to an adult video store.
These are
Today, porn is everywhere.
So why are we not seeing this proliferation of violence and all these terrible things
we are
happening?
seeing a
no,
lot
we're not.
of-
Those are all
we're
less
seeing a lot
than
of
they were
social
before.
ills.
When there were just those Playboy magazines,
That-
we had way more of that stuff than we do now with pornography
So you're
widely
saying we
available.
had, so is your argument that we had less child sexual assault material?
Child abuse has declined.
So
And
you
this is from
saying,
the-
are you saying that child sexual assault material can be created without child abuse?
I'm saying that like child abuse cases, all of those have gone down. I'm also saying
That's
that
incorrect,
STD
Jasmine.
rates have gone. This is according to
That's
the,
incorrect.
so
That's
It's
incorrect.
just incorrect. Okay, well, what
Yeah.
data do you have that shows
So
that that's
your argument is that the proliferation of porn somehow that has led to less
I didn't
child
say
sexual
it's
abuse.
led to. I'm not saying causation.
So what's
here.
your argument
My
then?
argument here is that if porn became widely available and it's so violent and it's so terrible, then how come we're not seeing those outcomes
Why is there a
reflected in real
proliferation
life?
of child sexual assault material on the internet, and it increases
Because
every year?
we have the
Jasmine?
internet now. We didn't have the internet before, but since we've had the internet,
So you-
we've had less abortion, less syphilis, less gonorrhea, less teen sex, less teen birth rates have fallen 33% according to the CDC. SA has declined, and then
so
there was
your
that spike.
so your
and
argument is that child sexual assault material is not porn, or what is your argument?
my
then?
argument, I'm not even talking about child sexual assault material.
What are you
now. My argument here is that when porn became widely available, we didn't see an increase in violence. In fact, I have lots of studies here that show that once porn became widely available, like for instance in the Czech Republic,
When did porn become widely available in the United States?
around the early 2000s. That's what I read.
So I think I can understand the argument you're making, but I don't think it bears out. For example,
Right.
with divorce rates, as an example, as I said earlier, one of the second highest most quoted thing when it comes to divorce today is the pornography use of one of the partners.
But divorce
So-
rates have also gone down since the
but
early
overall
2000s.
they've gone up over the last
Not since the
40,
so this is
50
my
years.
question.
But-
Since porn has
So-
become available, they have not gone up. They've actually gone down since the early 2000s.
Well, one reason
So-
they go down is people are choosing not to marry in the
That's
first
there's less
place.
fine,
people
but what
marrying,
I'm
that's
saying, and I
true.
don't think they're choosing not. I don't think they're not choosing to get married because
but
porn
I-
is available. But you have no link to that. My question is,
But hold on,
if
I think it's
all
a
of-
fact. It is a fact that the sexual revolution, which took place in this country mid 20th century, which opened the floodgates of pornography, first with, Playboy magazine, and then later on with the internet, which opened the floodgates to, no-fault divorce, more divorce, swinger culture, open marriages, all of this stuff, abortion, all of this stuff, that those social ills all mushroomed together. And
So
they
then-
still exist in large quantities in our society today together. Because when you treat sex just as orgasm or as something that as an adult I'm entitled to as long as I consent and someone else is consenting, and sex has no other morality around it, you are opening the door, and we have the doors wide open to divorce, to abortion, to a lot of the unhappiness that we're seeing in relationships
So
today.
you said
I
all
think
the
wait-
social
And porn is
data
part of
though agrees with you, but I'm pointing out that abortion rates have fallen 41% since the 90s. So
But
since-
abortion rates, since porn has been entered into the mainstream,
yes, has gone down.
gone up over the last 50 years dramatically.
But
So-
it became widely available in the late 90s. So the CDC abortion rates have fallen 41%
I don't think the data shows
since the
what you're saying it's
1990s.
showing.
People
But-
look it up. This is the CDC
okay,
that's saying this.
But you don't think that porn is the only reason?
I
for
don't think that. But my
but we don't even know
question
if
to
it
you
is
is
Yeah,
that
she's
if
not
it's
even
such a
arguing that
terrible
porn is the
thing,
cause of
where
it.
are these terrible outcomes?
And I'm
Because
trying
not
to say
seeing
that
them.
I'm trying to say that porn, whether it was the Playboy porn or it's the vastly available internet porn,
The terrible
So you're saying they're the same?
I think that they are part of the same problem, which is divorcing meaning from sex and welcoming, putting arms around hedonistic culture that breaks down families and breaks down marriages. And I'm saying that in the last 50 years in this country, we have seen unprecedented divorce,
50 years?
unprecedented abortion. We've seen unprecedented STIs. The sexual revolution's harm
Are we
at large.
talking about the
okay,
sexual
hold on. I
revolution
think-
or porn? Because I'm not talking about 50 years. I'm talking about since porn became widely available. You guys are saying, and all these terrible things, teen mom porn, so violent. Where are the outcomes that show that this is such an harm? Because I'm not seeing
about-
that.
how
I have
about the
3
first-
studies here. Actually, there's a lot of evidence that
Do
porn
you
has
think-
a cathartic effect.
Do you
on
think
men.
it's bad, Jasmine, that the average first stage of exposure to pornography is 11 years old?
I don't think that's ideal, but I don't think
No,
that
it's
we're
not
seeing-
asked. I said, is it bad?
Yeah, I think it's bad, but I'm not seeing that it's so bad that it's leading to such terrible outcomes, because it's not.
What
Where
hap-
are these outcomes?
What happens when children are exposed to pornography?
Actually, there's also a lot of conflicting data on that. A lot of the data on this is really frustrating because it's really conflicting.
is
I
it-
have studies here
Well,
that
we're
show
living
that
in
it's
a
not.
But
really-
Jasmine, part of the reason for that is we're living in a social
Wait,
experiment.
hold on one second. I want to know, is
Go
it
ahead.
bad when 11-year-olds, their first exposure to pornography? I'm just saying that's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's a bad thing in the sense that
why,
it's not
why
ideal.
is it bad? What does it do to them?
It's like they're not old enough. Their prefrontal cortex isn't developed enough to be able to look at that and realize what's real, what's not real, how sex is supposed to go. So I don't think porn is a great way.
How is sex supposed to go?
Probably not like if you're on Pornhub watching like 8 people gangbang someone, they're going to think that is normal.
That's
sex.
not normal?
Not
Okay, wait, hold on, wait. Okay, I think when we talk about how sex is supposed to go, okay, I think we have to build a constructive case for what are different ways that we can view sex. You guys seem to be really happy to say that like sex ought to be this, or society's destroyed sex, or blah, 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 blah. I think that you can posit a separate argument that sex is actually something that the body is capable of experiencing, that is a lot of fun, and we've evolved beyond the need to view sex as just a tool or a facility to pump out children, and instead can view it as a way to bond with people or have fun or enjoy recreationally. I think that we have the tools today to enjoy that because we've got things to protect or cure STDs. We've got ways to prevent pregnancies. We've got different types of birth controls. I think that it's okay that society has taken on a different view of sex, just like we've taken on a different view of women working jobs, or a different view of what kind of clothes can we wear because we have air conditioning, or a different view of what are the hours that we can be awake where we can travel. I think it's just natural that different things will evolve over time, that will view different things. Yeah, we can view things differently based on our way of engaging with them.
According to the Go Becker Institute, for women that get abortions, 50% of them in the month that they got pregnant were using contraception. So when you kind of say, well, now we have these technologies that can somehow sort of blunt the natural consequences of
I'm
sex.
sorry, wait, what was that supposed to refute?
So what's that supposed to refute is you're saying that we have all of these powers now.
To change the way we engage with sex, yes.
Change the way we engage with sex.
Was anything I said incorrect?
I think it's fully incorrect.
Okay, do you think that contraception reduces the likelihood? Well, no, let's one stat at a time.
Let me finish.
No, hold on.
I didn't even get to ask my question.
I didn't even barely talk for 2 sentences, and you wanted to cut me off with the thing about abortion. So I'm going to ask you, do you think contraception is effective at dramatically reducing the rates of getting impregnated?
I think that at large, contraception has led to the mindset, a contraceptive mindset.
I'm going to ask the same question again when you finish this.
I think
depends.
that over time,
okay.
it actually increases, it actually leads to more abortion over time.
Do you think that contraception is effective at preventing pregnancies?
It can in the short term, but over time it leads to more abortion.
Really? Do you have any evidence that somebody that is on? So you're saying you have a study right now that shows that somebody on contraception, on average, has more children over their lifetime than somebody that doesn't use contraception?
No, what I'm saying is,
so then you don't have any evidence for that. I don't know. You're giving me a lot of like socially constructed opinions you have no data for based on your presumptions of how you think that sex should operate religiously. But I reject those things. So obviously we know that contraception.
Destiny, we are not making a case that sex ought to be done religiously or ought to be done in this particular way. We are just saying that the view that prostitution and pornography require, which is that sex is just a hedonistic activity.
Why does it require that?
Because it would be wrong if how would you answer the question?
It can have many purposes. I think that when I go to a massage parlor, I'm paying, $80 to get a massage.
Right.
That can just be a person giving me a massage. With a partner, having a partner rubbing your back or your neck, that can feel like a lot more romantic. So, just because I go to the massage parlor doesn't mean I devalue the experience with like a partner, no? Or do you think it does? Earlier, you used the phrase, sex work isn't real because sex for hire doesn't make sense. It's like a friend for hire. What is a therapist? Can't you pay a therapist to review your problems with them and then they give you feedback?
But here's the thing.
And once you stop paying a sex worker, they stop having sex with you. Yeah.
But the whole point
that's why it's called work. Yeah.
No,
because we don't. It's more meaningful than that.
Of course, it is more meaningful. I would agree. Just like having a really good intimate conversation with a friend is more meaningful than having an intimate conversation with a therapist.
We've skipped around so many different places.
Only because I'm following you on your tangents. But go ahead.
I was trying to ask. You made a.
So if sex work is just a skill, it's something that people enjoy.
Yeah.
Do there have to be? Is this something that only specialists can? Well, let's say for example, so Jasmine, a lot of people do OnlyFans. They have other jobs. Like you're a lawyer. People have other jobs. So you can have someone who's a masseuse and does OnlyFans, or a therapist and does OnlyFans, right? Okay. So you're like a sex worker by night, masseuse, therapist during the day. Would it be okay if they offered those sex services as a part of their day job, being a masseuse?
Depends on what the day job is. If it's like a lawyer or something, or if it's like a therapist, probably not, because you're violating like an appropriate relationship to have with somebody. But if it's like your auto mechanic and he also sells you like pictures of his dick, it's probably not as big of a deal.
Let me give you another example. So my wife was a nurse at the hospital, so she worked with neurotelemetry, and people have brain injuries, spine injuries, stuff like that, and also older people and people who would need things like bathing and cleaning. Okay. So they need, to be cleaned, including clean their peritoneum, perineal care. So just like groin, crotch, butt, that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And some of them would ask her, and this would also happen to other nurses, hey, while you're down there, could you just play with my wee-wee a little bit, or masturbate me?
Okay.
So let's say you have a nurse who is also an OnlyFans, is a sex worker on the side. Should she be allowed to offer that?
My understanding, and I'm not a medical professional, but my understanding is that when you're making decisions related to patient care, if a patient under your care, engaging in friendly or sexual relationships with them can cause an inappropriate crossing of boundaries that compromises your ability to deliver good medical care. So I would say that in the case where somebody's like a therapist or a medical professional that's making decisions relating to your healthcare, it's probably not
Because
appropriate.
you just related
But
therapy
why?
to
Lawyers
friendship.
can't even accept
and saying
Hold
it
on,
was
wait.
work
How did my
when sex
relation
is
of therapy
work.
to friendship break anything that I just said?
Because you're saying that you can't enter this new dynamic of sexual relationship in a healthcare setting because that somehow violates the healthcare setting.
What's
Why?
being violated?
That's Trent's question. Why?
What did I just say was being violated?
What is being violated?
I said it like 3 times. I'll repeat it again. It's compromising your ability to deliver care.
But if the care is included,
Let me ask you this question:
sex work's included in care.
If the sex work, you wouldn't include sex work and health work together in care unless you're.
So.
We could invent a scenario where that's true. What if you're going to a hospital and part of the care is my husband has issues with erectile dysfunction? Maybe part of the health services is them jerking you off to make sure everything's working. In that case, you would combine it. Would you agree, or would you say it's still inappropriate? Wait, I want to answer for that. Would you, if that case, would that be an appropriate combination of like?
No, I don't think you should go to people to jerk you off. No, that's.
Do you think it would be? Do you think ignoring your personal sexual views? Do you think it would be appropriate?
It's not a personal sexual view. It's the view that's actually been
because
held for thousands of years by many millions and billions of people.
So if you're going to a hospital and they're trying to check you for a working sexual function, them seeing if you can get an erection, that would be an inappropriate way for them to examine you.
I think if they are really trying to determine if you can get an erection, there's a way, and you're a married person in a marriage. There's
what
a
if
way
you're not
to
a married person?
determine
What if
that.
you're single?
Why would they need to determine that?
Because believe it or not,
What
there
would
are
be the
people in
medical
this world that
situation?
even when they're not married, they want to ensure that their sexual function is working.
And sex is
Wait, I really want to answer that. I really want to answer that.
I
You
don't
disagree
think,
with that? You don't think
it's
your sexual function is
necessary.
relevant if you're not
No,
married?
I think it's relevant, but I think that I don't think it would be good care to go into a hospital and say.
There is
okay, hold on, wait. I really want to answer this. So if you have problems with erectile dysfunction, it would be inappropriate for a healthcare provider to assess the ability of you to get an erection while you're at the hospital. That's inappropriate.
I mean, I think it depends. I'm curious what the standard of care is for that right now. I mean, do you know what the standard of care is?
I'm
right
not,
now?
but I'm asking you as a hypothetical. But I'm asking if you go to the hospital, you have problems with erectile dysfunction. Doctor, I've got issues. And they say, okay, we're going to give you a medication. We're going to try something. And we'll see if we can get an erection.
I think it would be a strange form of care to say, well, let's try
I didn't ask if it was strange or not. I asked if it was appropriate.
I don't think it would be appropriate.
No, you don't think it would be appropriate.
I think giving a medication.
So that type of healthcare is totally outlaw.
We would agree.
To be clear, giving a medication would be appropriate.
It's fine to use medical treatment.
To stimulate them.
It's fine to use medical treatment to see if your body is working properly. It's fine to do things to acquire semen, for example. You might use, for example, with some patients, use electroejaculation stimulation of the prostate in order to get. Well, for some patients, that's what you have to do, including if they're paralyzed.
Okay, I understand what you just said was a way more hardcore kink than water sports, but okay, go ahead.
No, to see if you can ejaculate, to see if you're able. There is a difference between trying to determine if your body is functioning properly and saying that sex is just a service that can be provided. If we provide people in the hospital, we provide them all kinds of services to make sure they're comfortable, right? Like we give them television. They don't need that to live, right?
Okay.
But it makes them comfortable, correct?
Yeah.
So we give patients stuff in the hospital to make sure that they stay as comfortable. We give them television. We give them different food they can choose. We give them bathing, obviously. And when they're very uncomfortable, we do things to make sure they're comfortable. So if a patient says, sex would make me very comfortable, why wouldn't, if a nurse can clean the guy's testicles and penis and is already handling all of this, why not just you put on the gloves and give him a hand job?
Well, one is because it's illegal. Two, if it were legal, my guess would be the procedure for that would be you would bring in a third party or you contract out to somebody.
Why do you bring in a third party
I've already
to give the guy?
explained it.
Let me finish. Why do you need to bring in a third party to give the guy a hand job and not a third party to wipe his butt and clean between his peritoneum?
Because when you start engaging in romantic or sexual or
who says it's romantic? It's just getting.
I said or means
intimate.
any of these.
Yeah.
When you engage in romantic or sexual or friendship type things, that these things are all inappropriate because they compromise your ability to objectively offer care. For instance, would it be inappropriate to say, well, can you please just like jerk me off? You're going to clean my ass? Yes, that would be, because if a patient starts to have a sexual relationship with a practitioner, then if that practitioner has to make a tough call on that patient's health, that might be compromised. The same way that let's say the person starts saying like, man, my kids never.
Why does sex do this stuff?
Let me just finish. Hold on, I got to finish this one thing. Oh my God. Okay. Let's say that the patient comes in or the nurse comes in and the patient starts talking to the nurse like, man, my kids aren't calling me, like I don't know what to do. And then the nurse sits around and they start talking blah, 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 blah. That would be equally inappropriate. That would be incredibly inappropriate.
Wait,
if they
repeat
started
that?
to form a very close friendship with a patient, that would also be inappropriate. Because again, if a tough call has to be made on the patient, at some point, you might not be able to make that tough call because now your judgment is compromised. This is why surgeons that have like wives or husbands don't operate on them because their judgment is compromised.
But what if you can give hand jobs and you're not attached? It's just sex work.
Well, right now, in terms of how human relationships and everything work, it seems to be the case
you're
that
saying something very important, which is that there is an emotional, psychological component to sex.
As a lawyer, we have rules on
Am I
how we're
understanding you
able to
correctly, though?
engage with people.
Hold
We're
on,
not
I just
allowed
wanna-
to
I wanna
accept
make
gifts,
sure-
for instance.
I
Like,
want to
as-
make sure I'm understanding Destiny correctly and what he just said.
Hold on. Let
Okay.
Lila go, then we'll have you come in. Go.
And I do want to get back to the contraception thing, but you had said that there's an emotional, romantic connection to sex. That's I don't know if you used the word-
oftentimes there can be, yes.
Yes. So that sounds like more than work.
It can be.
Yeah. So you're when you guys talk about
Wait,
sex
no, hold on.
work, like
I'm sorry.
it's
Wait,
something-
I'm sorry, real quick. I reject that. What do you mean that sounds like more than work?
When you talk about sex work, like we can sell this commodity of sex, like
It's a service.
to lead, like it's a service. You're saying, well, but more emotions and psychological, romantic feelings get involved. Therefore, it doesn't belong in the professional setting of healthcare. That's what you're
Because
saying.
but like,
So how can you still say it's work and it's a professional?
do teachers
job?
work?
Yes,
Do they have emotional connections to children and parents?
and they should. That's a
okay,
healthy
so then
thing.
that argument doesn't make any sense. So what's the next one?
Well, are you saying that a nurse should not have an emotional connection at all to her patient?
Generally, they try to minimize it. Yes.
They should have empathy. That's actually required for nurses to have empathy.
You're telling
They
me-
shouldn't have
Are
empathy.
you-
They should have compassion. They're two different things because empathy
They-
can compromise your
sure,
ability
we
to
can
deliver.
Are you
the word
saying a
compassion,
nurse
that's fine,
can't
but I-
understand
I-
the personal background, desires, hopes, and develop a friendly rapport with a patient?
I
You can
think you're
have like
making
a
a
friendly
distinction where there isn't
you
one.
can no it's a key, it's a crucial distinction. Having a friendly rapport with somebody is different than becoming personally emotionally invested in the outcome. You have to maintain an appropriate level of distance, whether you're a lawyer,
Right.
whether
And
you're a
I
medical
agree.
professional.
And sex crosses that line because of what sex just
But
intrinsically
many
is.
things cross that line. Like I just said, when you're a lawyer, you can't accept certain gifts. You can't get too close to your clients. They can't become like best friends to you. That's going to cause problems for you down the line. We take entire classes on this, on all the ways we're not supposed to get too close with our clients. And it's not all sexually. It's even just in friendship.
Yeah.
So professionalism, the standard for professionalism, I agree, it's not professional to offer sexual services to somebody in a setting where that's not appropriate. But there are other things that aren't appropriate either. It doesn't mean they're all bad and that you can't use them in a
So
different
I think, the point that you're making though is that sex is personal. It involves it can involve romance. It involves feelings. It involves this connectivity that you sometimes can't help but have, and that's our point.
Well, I
That's
have a-
our
I have a
point.
question.
Sex
Wait,
is
wait, wait,
yours
wait.
and
That's
me.
not your point.
That
That's
is a very important part of our point.
No, that's every single human's point. We all understand that. Everyone here agrees that a therapist.
You understand that, but you also think it's acceptable to have these sexual relationships with potentially thousands of people
You're
online
missing.
for
You're
sale.
not understanding. The whole point of your argument has to do with dual relationships, and you're trying to apply this to singular relationships. We all agree here that a therapist having sex with a patient would be bad, right?
Why?
because it impacts
Don't-
their
what do you mean
ability.
why?
Let's say the therapist is a
Well,
sex
a therapist
therapist.
should be
A
should
sex
be-
therapist is obviously not the type of therapist.
But
I'm talking
why-
about.
hold on.
No,
hold
but that's the
Gifts
thing.
from
Is
my
sex
client.
therapists,
Wait, hold on.
it's illegal for sex therapists to have sex with their own clients.
I don't.
They
know.
can talk to them
I'm
about
not even.
sex.
Hold on. I'm not even sure that's true. Hold on. Okay. Okay. I can't ask a question because I'm not going to get any engagement.
You
so
may
I'll just
ask-
make my
That's
point.
not true, Justin.
I'm not.
We're
It is a
engaging.
very simple question. Is can a therapist have sex with a patient? And then you're like, well, what about sex therapy?
No.
Well,
They
I
can-
think
they
Jasmine
cannot.
considers what she does a
Correct.
form
But
of
I'm
And they
saying
can't because
that
it
therapy.
compromises your ability to give good
But
therapy.
what I am saying is that if sex is just a service that is provided,
I-
and it
I-
has
wait,
this.
we don't have to. I understand the next stage of your argument. I'm trying to show why that's ridiculous. I understand it. You're going to say,
Well,
fine,
then
sex-
I will take it out of the dual role to the single role, and I'll give you
Wait.
a hypothetical.
Let's just explore this for 2 seconds, then we can go to whatever you're going to jump to, okay? A therapist cannot have sex with a patient because it compromises their ability to deliver good therapy.
Well, it
we
depends
agree
on
that.
their relationship, right?
And
Stop.
no, that's
No.
not the only reason.
Oh my God.
Go ahead.
It does.
It would also be equally inappropriate for a therapist to form a close friendship with and to go out and like have
Yeah,
drinks or
that was
meals
my
with a
point.
It's
patient.
not the
but it
reason-
doesn't mean that drinks and dinner are super
bad.
inappropriate.
It's not
and
just that,
ultra
because when a
special.
therapist has sex with a patient, Destiny, it's grape. Because the therapist has a power imbalance over the patient and can manipulate their emotions, and there are consent issues involved.
Sure, that's true as well. That's not what we're
That's the
focused
more
on here.
important reason.
Okay, we can pick a nurse and a
But
patient
I
as
think
well.
I think it must be said that a lot of people involved in creating pornography and prostitution consider what they do a form of therapy for the client.
That's
But
not at all what
there
we're
is a
talking about.
reason that the sexual revolution has coincided with us being more cognizant of things like consent, because the whole point of the sexual revolution and allowing people more freedom in how they want to express their sexuality is that it's a choice, but it's still your choice, right? That's why things like marital rape was outlawed in the 90s. We have the rape shield doctrine. You're not allowed to bring up a victim's past sexual history in a sexual assault case. We have the Me Too movement. So I don't think power imbalances are important because that can get in the way of consent. So consent is super important, but what you choose to do is not. That's what the sexual. It's on accident that those two things.
And Me Too is a reaction against the excesses of the sexual revolution. So I mean, I think to say that these things are given to us by the sexual revolution is totally.
Well, let me.
It is though.
All right.
Like
so,
marital rape. Marital rape.
The early
outlawed,
feminists.
Rape
The early
shield.
feminists.
You're saying Me Too is a reaction to what?
Me Too is the reaction to the excesses of the sexual revolution.
I don't think
and,
so.
And a lot of the reform that was requested in the way that marriages took place and marital rape protection was early feminists who are not sexual revolutionaries, who themselves wanted family values, and many of them were pro-life.
But no.
So to say that it was the sexual revolutionaries that gave us these things is not correct.
I'm saying that those two things coincided at the same time, because the whole point of the sexual revolution was that, okay, you're not going to be ruined now because you choose to have casual sex, but if someone comes in, because there was a lot of inappropriate harassment, rape, etc., statute of limitations has been increased due to the Me Too movement. All of these things coincided because consent is a huge part of the sexual revolution.
And
I think that.
And Me Too was a response to people seeing women as commodities that they can acquire and seeing sex as a means of acquiring that commodity. Basically, it's responding to a dehumanizing view of sex. Now, I agree, many people don't have that view, but I do think that the hedonistic view of sex does lead to that.